Here.
We need to roll.
Wait.
Welcome again. Two gavels this time to the Banking Consumer Affairs Committee, where we had the Elvis bill in here a couple of weeks ago, but Elvis has left the room, so we're going to call the roll. Madam Clerk.
Representative Barrett. Bricken. Camper. Faison. Garrett. Lynn. Sparks. Vaughn. Chairman Powers.
Here.
Chairman Powers, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. And let's do a little, first of all, are there any personal orders on the committee before we take off? Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had the privilege of having a shadow with me today from the Eagle Forum, a seventh grader, Bryant Herschler from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Stand up, Bryant. Y'all welcome him today.
Thank you for being here. And Representative Lynn.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned it this morning. Today is Super Tuesday, and exactly 12 years ago today, our first grandson was born, Benji, and he is just a light in our lives. And I actually couldn't vote that day because I always vote early, but my husband talked me into voting on Election Day. And if that baby didn't come on Election Day, we were at the hospital. So I didn't vote on that Super Tuesday 12 years ago, but I did vote today. So thank you.
Thank you. That's just good reason not to have a child on Election Day. Okay. Chairman Bricken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's a lady that's standing up in the back that with the Tennessee Eagles Forum that name was Frances Arthur. And she's been an instructor in the Tennessee Eagles Forum for years and years and does just a wonderful job in educating our kids in the right way. And I thank her for her service. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for being here today. Okay, we have a little housekeeping to do. We're rolling House Bill 1062 and 2092 by Chairman Vaughn to the heel of the calendar. And House Bill 2762 by Chairman Grills has been rolled 1 week. House Bill 1819 by Representative Miller has been taken off notice. Okay. Okay, just found out House Bill 2615 has been taken off notice too. Okay, I'd like to withdraw one. House Bill 2762 has not been rolled 1 week, and that's just a little error on our part. We'll be hearing it today. And that brings us to item 1 on our calendar by Chairman Zachary, House Bill 2100. And I see you have an amendment.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Drafting code 14685.
That's what we have. We have a motion and a second on the amendment. All in favor say aye. All opposed. The amendment is added onto the bill. Chairman Zachary, I know you have some words of wisdom for us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know about words of wisdom, but I do have words. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'm not going to belabor the point. We spent quite a bit of time here for testimony last week. both for and against this piece of legislation. In consultation with Chairman Powers, Vice Chairman Bricken, Chairman Vaughn, we did bring this amendment that excludes the loan aspect of this. So that was some heartburn among committee members and just created some questions. So we removed that aspect. So this only applies to deposit accounts. And then also just to further clarify related to the notification piece, we did put in unless otherwise prohibited by federal law. There were some questions about the suspicious activity report and some of the language in Dodd-Frank pertaining to what could be disclosed. So just to provide absolute clarity, Mr. Chairman, we made sure that was included. And let me just quickly say, again, I'm not going to belabor the point. Let me just quickly say, I talked to the AG's office. This is information you have not heard. I've talked to the AG's office. They have received complaints from people. They are working on cases actually now related to some of the issues in this bill. And the one thing they did tell me was it is extremely important that for them to investigate and move forward with issues like this needs to be under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. So everything that we talked about, something that was not mentioned, I don't think by anybody last week, the point of all this is to protect Tennesseans, period, bottom line. And so this legislation, if passed, would put all of this under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. There were some mention last week about federal rules and regulations. Without question, there's some federal rules and regulation in place, but we don't have that on the state level. So this piece of legislation, per my conversation with the AG, would equip them to move forward with investigations when their offices are contacted, and allows us to tell our constituents when these issues are brought to us, we direct them to the AG's office. It falls under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act of 1977, and it completely changes the process and grievances from our constituents or complaints from our constituents and how they're addressed. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if there's other questions, I've talked to all the members of the committee. If there's other questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But again, I'm not going to move any further than that.
All right. Thank you. And we'll bring you back up, but we have a couple of people that are going to testify real quick. And we have on the list, we have two people that are going to testify. First person on the list will be Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee, are you here? Okay. Would you care to come forward and turn the mic on there and tell us who you're with and where you're from?
Mr. Chairman, members of
I'm
the
sorry,
committee.
we're going out of session today.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Chris Lee. I represent NSSF, which stands for National Shooting Sports Foundation. NSSF is the trade association for the firearm industry. So we represent about 10,500 firearm businesses and companies across the country, many of which have moved to Tennessee in recent years. So congratulations on that. We have about 13,000 people that work in the firearm industry here in Tennessee right now. To be honest, I was only planning on answering questions, so I don't have written testimony, but I've worked on this issue since I joined the firearm industry 5 years ago, this issue of discrimination against the firearm industry. And it really all started back in 2012 with a program that I know you all heard of called Operation Choke Point, which was a federal directive that impacted and targeted the firearm industry. And that directive was canceled by the Trump administration in 2016. But unfortunately, at that point, we had shareholders of some large financial institutions that said, even though we don't have a federal directive to shut down services to the firearm industry, we're going to do it anyway. And Citigroup kind of led that. And there was actually a good article about Citigroup's push to debank the firearm industry that I believe came out last year. And they did. They recruited other banks that boycotted the firearm industry. And then they recruited insurance companies. And then they recruited payment processors. And then they recruited trucking companies, believe it or not. Last year alone, we had 10 trucking companies boycott the firearm industry. And it's so bad, just to give you an example of how far this has gone. I was touring one of our members in Kentucky last year, and they made orange handguards for firearms that are for law enforcement purposes. And they called their normal trucking company and said, hey, can you come pick up these law enforcement handguards, not even firearms, literally a firearm component. And they were told by their trucking company that no, because of our new ESG policy, we don't carry any firearm parts, accessories, or the firearms themselves. That's how far this has gone. And it all did start with banking and insurance, and it impacts every member of our industry today. And I actually did hear last week, after your hearing on this bill, I did hear from one of our members here in Tennessee that's been severely impacted by debanking, and it's a serious issue for our industry. So I appreciate your work on this bill, and I appreciate Representative Zachary for bringing it forward.
All right, and thank you for that. Yeah, I've heard a lot of new terms, debanking, rebanking, unbanking. I've never heard before. Do we have any questions for the witness at all? Representative Lynn?
I am not an attorney, but that literally sounds like racketeering. I mean, they're really, that's horrible. Has the industry investigated responding in some way, or?
Yep. Thank you for asking that question. We have, and we actually started with the bill. We've worked on legislation across the country to try to push back on this, both at the federal level and at the state level. And we call it, a lot of these bills are focused on the firearm industry. So I know we have a broader bill here, but we call them Firearm Industry Non-Discrimination Acts. And those bills initially said that if you're a bank, because you're so heavily backed by the federal government, you cannot discriminate against the firearm industry because it's necessary to the exercise of a constitutional right. But we kind of evolved that bill 3 years ago to where the bill now in our model language just says that the state can't grant contracts to companies of any industry that boycott the firearm industry just based on ESG policies. And that bill, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe that's law in about 5 states now. And there's about 2 states that have said that it's illegal altogether to debank the firearm industry. So yes, we have tried to push back with legislation in many states.
Representative Lynn?
Well, what I'm thinking is if other businesses are actually colluding together to try to harm, other businesses, what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
I know it's disturbing, and meeting with these small business owners that, on top of dealing with all the regulation that the firearm industry has to deal with, we're heavily regulated by the federal government. We're being regulated by other industries, right? That we're just trying to work with to provide for people, and it's unnecessary, and like I said, it's very harmful to our industry.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you for coming out today, and we appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
And yeah, next on the list, we have Chris Holmes, and with First Bank. Mr. Holmes, would you come forward and give us, got 3 minutes to talk, and then we'll have some Q&A after that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I do have a few remarks. Thank you very much. I'm Chris Holmes. I'm the President CEO of First Bank. It's good to be with the committee. And as you know, I'm not in politics. I run a bank, and so I'm going to speak in banking language, or try to speak as plain as possible. And so as I understand it, this legislation won't allow banks to refuse to do business with a legally or quantitatively qualified business. Banks are already subject to regulation on who we can and who we can't do business with. Federal regulation dictates that we can't discriminate on the basis of race, religion, color, nationality, origin, sex, disability, age. And so we already are not allowed to refuse to do business on any of those factors. This legislation goes beyond that and begins to speak to corporate values. And some banks have taken a position, and other businesses take a position on whether it's appropriate for them to be forced to do business with certain other businesses. We just heard an example of some banks which chose not to do that. But as running one of those, there are certain businesses that we may choose not to do business with as well that could be quantitatively qualified. For instance, pornography business, or a gambling business, or a marijuana business, or a loan shark business may be businesses that we would not choose to do business with, but would be forced to if quantitatively qualified, and many of those businesses would do that. On the deposit side of the business, we're actually on the front line of fighting terrorism, financial fraud, corruption through what you've heard, the Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering, know your customer. We're required to know our customer on the deposit side. We're required to know about legally, again, where those funds come from, and we're required to monitor activity on those accounts. Extensive daily reporting goes into that, including filing suspicious activity reports and closing accounts that does happen for reasons that we're not legally allowed to disclose. Okay, most importantly, I just want to speak to to character. That's one of the key evaluations for a bank is character. And it's vital for us to be able to evaluate that. Many of you own small businesses, and I dare say some of you own businesses that you weren't quantitatively qualified whenever you got support from a bank, and you got it outside of that quantitative qualification. On the flip side, sometimes you are quantitatively qualified, and I can tell you where we've done business with folks that we wouldn't do business again, even though they are quantitatively qualified and in good standing. And so
Okay.
I would just say that I think the Tennessee formula of sensible regulation has been one that has us in a very enviable spot for the other states around us. And I would encourage you guys to continue
Okay.
that same.
Okay, thank you. And we're out of time. Do we have questions for the guest? Okay. Chairman Brickett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Holmes. So glad you're here. Just for the committee, First Bank certainly is a premier bank in Tennessee. I think it's the third largest bank, $13 billion in assets, about over 100 years old. And so Mr. Holmes does a wonderful job in leading that bank. I guess my only one question for you, if this legislation should pass, will it affect First Bank?
Yes, sir. There is some cost to the commissioner to be able to enforce the legislation. That cost is then passed on to banks. In addition, for us, it will require new processes, new procedures, new documentation at the front line, and training of frontline individuals. So it does come at a initial cost and an ongoing cost for us. The one other thing I mention is that you should make a distinction between consumers and businesses. Consumers are protected by various consumer protection laws. Really, I think talking about businesses here is really what we're talking about. And both today's testimony and the testimony last week, each instance, they were actually not talking about individuals. They were talking about businesses.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Brickett.
It's kind of a follow-up because maybe there's a little confusion with the currently amended portion of the bill affecting only the deposit side and affecting only banks of 100 billion and greater. That's why my little bit of confusion is why it would impact First Bank or any bank in Tennessee. And so I'm trying to get some clarity on that. So thank you.
Yeah, is it still 100 billion and up?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's still once that enters into full the system for any bank, then effectively it becomes something that we pretty much have to follow for all the banks.
Okay. And we'll have the sponsor when he gets up to clarify that. Chairman Brickett.
I like to follow up with that because Mr. Holmes certainly touches on, just for clarification, the trickle-down effect that federal regulations of large size, even though they're meant for only certain size banks, for whatever reason, has a spillover trickle-down effect down to the community level. I wish it didn't happen, but I can assure to this committee that sadly does happen. So
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Representative Garrett. Oh, pass. Representative Sparks.
Mr. Holmes, good to see you. How's Mr. Ayers doing?
Mr. Ayers is actually doing well. Thank you for asking. He's I've been through some health events recently, but he's doing quite
Yeah, I
well.
appreciate him taking a stance on the Asian carp of all issues. You know,
Yes.
it's a big issue that threatens our waterways and ecosystem. But you know, I want to support his legislation. I think there's merit. He wouldn't be doing all this hard work. I have a lot of respect for Chairman Zachary. I think with Florida, DeSantis took a position on this. So you're saying the legislation would, as written, would affect the small banks, would affect, well, not to say y'all are a small bank, but under the 100 billion mark?
Yes, sir. My opinion is that begins again to affect all the way through once that legislation becomes true legislation. I think it does begin to. I'll use Mr. Representative Bricken's phrase, trickle down.
I know that, one of the
Representative Spark?
areas that most of us look at, I'd say, is we don't want to put excessive mandates on small businesses. I do think there is a threat to the First Amendment. I think there's a threat to people's First Amendment rights, and I think those threats are subtle. I've seen it personally in my district, and I often bring up an African-American church that was literally locked out for 2 years. Couldn't worship in their own church. They didn't have a lobbyist. I got another white church that was threatened to have their doors padlocked. They had no lobbyist. Thankfully, the fire marshal stepped in, Gary Farley, to help. But you've heard me say on this committee, Chairman, Volunteer Bank kept working with that church for 2 years. They couldn't worship. NAACP, ACLU, none of them were there to speak for them. Zero. They had no voice. A lot of these issues, like the reference to the PayPal that spoke the other day, they had no voice. When we have these little outliers that happen across the state, I think we need to pay attention. I'm going to support the bill to get it out of committee. Proverbs says there's wisdom in the multitude of counselors. So I'd like to hear more debate at full committee. Not saying I'm going to vote for it at full committee, but I'd like to have some others chime in on this piece of legislation, have some more feedback, some more examples where these cases have happened, because it's a serious threat, I think, to democracy. But by the same token, for myself and probably this committee, we don't want to put excessive regulation and mandates on our banks. We love our bankers up here. Our banks do a great job, especially our smaller banks. And just want to encourage my fellow lawmakers to move this forward when the vote's there. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions thank you for coming forward today. We appreciate it. Thanks for the information.
Thank you, Chairman Powell.
And we're going to go back into session. Chairman Zachary, you're recognized to talk about CARP or any other thing that you want to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Just to provide some clarity, while I appreciate the gentleman from First Bank's testimony, this legislation does not apply to any Tennessee chartered bank. All Tennessee chartered banks are under $100 billion. It does not apply. And then I can go to the fiscal note, which clearly states the proposed legislation will not result in any impact to commerce or jobs in the state of Tennessee and will not have an impact to overall business expenditures in the state. So it will not have a fiscal impact to any bank that's under $100 million, just to be clear. Members, as a reminder, all of this, we're not putting any additional on the largest 28 banks. We're not putting in any additional regulation. We're not putting in additional prohibitions. We're simply saying you cannot deny or discriminate based on things that are in federal law now. And as I stated earlier, it is to get this into the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act to better serve our constituents. Most of this is, except for the social credit piece, of course, is already in federal statute today. But we need to get this under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act of 1977 to give our constituents and Tennesseans the ability to be able to contact our AG and them to be able to investigate anytime this is done. And again, we don't have any issue with our Tennessee charter banks. It's not an issue. I've talked to numerous CEOs of banks. This is not a practice of theirs. But again, I'm not going to belabor points, Mr. Chairman, but as we talked about last week, I have the letter from the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky that was signed by 19 AGs. And then we have a separate letter from 14 different treasurers around the country filing grievances against Chase, Citi, and a few others for their debanking efforts, and then related to processors. There's also some issues there. But Mr. Chairman, again, this legislation is extremely important to the well-being of Tennesseans, and this puts this under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act, ensures that our Tennesseans are not discriminated against. And if the banks aren't doing this, which we've heard over and over again, we're not doing this, then they're not going to have any problem with the bill, because they'll never be in violation if they're not doing it. But if they are, this will ensure our Tennesseans have recourse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. And we have some questions for you, I believe. Representative Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Zachary, I think your amendment really improves the bill, and it really makes it very clear at what you're getting at. And I think that's very good. I know that similar legislation passed in Florida, and have you been able to, I know you're a great researcher, obviously. Have you been able to ascertain, has there been any effect on state banks in Florida that would be under your $100 billion threshold? Have they opined at all about any effects on them?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Lim. Great question. So in Florida recently, and it was touched on briefly last week, in Florida recently, they had 117 banks sign an attestment that they would not, the practices that are listed in this legislation, they had 117 banks, both federal and state chartered banks, sign an attestment that they would not do this in order for them to continue to do business with the state of Florida. So 117 banks agreed not to take these steps, which did include Florida chartered banks. And so that's a significant step. Also, since this passed, I believe it was April of last year, 0 lawsuits, 0 litigation specifically related to this bill. So we're literally almost a year into a test run in Florida, kind of as the poster child, and no legal action has been brought based on that bill. Also, there are roughly 15 states that have brought some semblance of this bill, no lawsuits related to us.
Okay, anyone else? Questions for the Representative Barrett?
Thank you, Representative Zachary. You heard the testimony here just a few minutes ago that one of the concerns of the banks is that if this bill were to go into law, that they might have to do business with an entity or an individual who is quantitatively qualified and in good standing. Isn't that exactly what you're trying to do with this bill?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Barrett. It's a good question. And so I would go back to, I'd point you to the Department of Treasury document from the Office of the Comptroller of Currency from back in April 1st of 2021. And this is what that document says. Some banks continue to employ subjective or category-based evaluations to deny certain persons access to financial services. When a bank predicates a person's access to financial services on factors other than quantitative and partial risks-based standards, it has failed to act consistently with the basic principles of sound risk management. So we're not telling these banks that they can continue to deny marijuana. I think marijuana and CBD, some of that stuff is brought up. You can't, that's illegal in Tennessee. You can't do that anyway. If it's within their policies to deny strip clubs, deny strip clubs. That doesn't change this. You simply can't deny or discriminate based on religious views, political beliefs, or what's listed in that social credit score. That's it. And so that's a really good question. It's important to make that determination. It's also important, the document I'm reading out of, it's important to note this was under the Trump administration, and these have since been rescinded by the Biden administration.
And Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgive me, Mr. Chairman, for not being here on time. I had some people from the district in the office, so I had to see.
You've got a demerit.
By George. And I missed the testimony when I got here. The gentleman was testifying, so I'm not sure if this was addressed during the testimony. But if memory serves me correctly from the last time we were looking at this bill, Mr. Sponsor, it was some questions around the banking institution having to disclose or give information to the person for the denial of credit, I'm thinking. And part of the concern was the maybe a conflict in what federal law says about them doing this and how it puts the bank in some level of jeopardy with federal law. And, the state saying you have to do it anyway. Was that addressed at all in the amendment? Because I think I'm on the right amendment, but I just kind of want to make sure. I'm sorry I was late, but I had to see
Chairman
my
Zachary.
folk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leader, no worries. You're in leadership. We'll let you take any,
Bye,
get any pass
George.
you want. Minority or not. Yes, ma'am. Great question. So we clarified, to bring further clarity, that we added, unless otherwise prohibited by federal law, then that's when the notification takes place.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
so we rectified that. Thank
ma'am.
you for that. So the amendment that we're on is drafting code. Is it
14685.
see, gee whiz, I'm looking the wrong one. Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, may I, or just not to interrupt you, Leader,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
also
no,
just
fine. I
related
was
to
looking at
that
the wrong one.
amendment, Leader, this is what you would have missed. In section 1, we clarified by saying this does not include loans. So we clarified the lending piece of that. So we removed that. This just applies to deposit accounts. And so that may be another question that you had. So loans are defined in TCA 454601 in greater detail, but we removed that piece, so it does not apply to that anymore.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, but it's dealing with institutions that are, their assets are 100 billion plus in assets. So the ones beneath that will not be affected by this legislation. That's
Chairman
still
Zachary.
in your amendment.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. That still stays. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else before we vote? Okay, we have no further questions. The sponsor had called for a roll call vote.
It's fine,
and
Mr. Chairman. It's fine. We just do a voice vote. It's fine.
Okay, yeah, we're
May I
gonna take a
before-
brief, yes.
May I, roll call vote's fine. Let's do a roll call vote. Zip through it. I don't want to hold the committee yet. Let's roll.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay, we're just gonna get a clarification. Okay. Okay, with that in mind, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representative Barrett? Yes. Barrett votes aye. Representative Bricken?
Yes.
Representative Bricken votes aye. Representative Camper? No. Representative Camper votes no. Representative Faison? Representative Garrett? Representative Garrett votes aye. Representative Lynn? Representative Lynn votes aye. Representative Sparks? Representative Sparks votes aye. Chairman Powers?
Pass.
Representative Vaughn? Okay. Chairman Powers, you have 5 ayes, 1 no.
And the bill moves on. Chairman Zachary, you move on to full commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Okay, item number 2. No, it's been rolled. Okay, item number 3, and we have House Bill 2798 by Chairman Hulsey. And, oh, there he is. And got a motion and a second, and you have a few amendments. So let's start out with Amendment 1.
Yes, sir, I have 2 actually, if I could get you to consider them, 14,797 and 14,158.
Okay, yes, that's correct. We need to do one at a time, okay? And
Okay.
vote on. Okay, do I have a motion on 1497? Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. And that has been adopted. And the next amendment is amendment number 14158. Do I have a motion and a second? And, okay, all in favor say aye. And that amendment is adopted also. And Representative Hulsey, would you care to explain the bill as amended, please?
Thank you so much. There's been a trend in the country recently to do away with cash, businesses do away with cash. And I brought this bill to you, I think, 2 years ago. So some of this material is 2 years old, but I don't know what it is now, but 2 years ago, 31% of businesses in this country refuse cash. And found out some card companies are paying $10,000 to some businesses to stop accepting cash. You just heard a ESG bill in here. China's done away with cash and use ESG scoring or some form of it, or even other more draconian things to control people on what they can do and what they can't do and what their card will work on and what it won't, even restricting travel. Some banks and payment providers like PayPal, Stripe, and Patreon have closed accounts of individuals who identify as politically conservative because they disagree with their politics. PayPal and Square and Stripe and Apple Pay do not allow their services to be used for the sale of firearms. What you've got is 25% of the population out here is either underbanked or no banked. And they do all their business with cash. Now you have grocery stores that are forbidding the use of cash and a card only. So that's the reason for this bill is that U.S. cash has always been king. You can't track it. You can spend it where you want to. Nobody can keep up with it. Nobody can see what you bought. It gives you complete anonymity. But more than that, it says on every piece of currency that it is U.S. currency and it's good for every debt, private and public. So I understand that businesses make business decisions and those kinds of things, and I'm trying to beat up on businesses. But cash is U.S. legal tender, and we ought to be able to use it wherever you go. Now, these amendments right here, as amended, first off, if you have a little company that employs less than 6 employees, you don't have to comply with this. Visa came to me and said, look, what if you had an amendment in there that they can put a piece of equipment here that they have? I didn't even know they had this, that you could put cash in the darn thing. I'm sorry, the great thing. You can put cash in the great thing, and it will issue you a debit card for the amount of cash that you put in there. And then you can go into the business and use your debit card. So one of these amendments says, yes, you can do that. Coupled up with that is it says that higher education, when they're having big events like football games and those kind of things, they can set up one of those pieces of equipment to do that. But it also says that this bill doesn't apply to those big events and the parking usually that goes with those big events at higher education, like football games, those kind of things. It also says that government has to take cash when it's offered. So anybody paying their water bill or electric bill or fines or fees or taxes, those kind of things, they can pay with cash. So that's what the bill does, and that's the whole purpose of it.
And I bet we have some questions for Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Holsey, for bringing the piece of legislation. I didn't realize there was some amendments that allowed the credit card or the debit card to spit back out. That makes me even more nervous. I don't use debit cards for people just because of the fraud that surrounds that. But my question is this, and this just came to me sitting here. So, if you go to the airport and you're flying Southwest, whatnot, you usually purchased your tickets beforehand, right? You either got it on your card or your phone or whatnot. Then if you're going to add a bag or something, then you go to the little kiosk and put your credit card in there, and that's how you do it. For that purpose, the airport, or at least the terminal, whether you're Southwest, Delta, or whatever, don't have the ability to take cash. They don't keep cash there. How do we address situations that we could probably all come up with where it's, if you have to go to a particular cashier's desk at an airport, something like that, there's a lot of people that you got to catch your flight, you got to get your gate, you got those security. It can create a huge delay in the convenience service factor, which we all, I believe, would hold dear on travel, so to speak, for this particular instance. But my fear is those type situations where cash may not be the best alternate, or at least practical. So how would we address a situation like that? And if your bill passes and that's required, how does a business like the airport, and it's not necessarily the airport, to be Southwest or the carrier, deals with that situation? What's the penalty if it's not practically, if it can't be followed?
Chairman Halsey.
Thanks for the question. This bill, of course, deals with in-person retail transactions. Every time I've always flown, you had to get your ticket ahead of time. And of course, that wouldn't be an in-person transaction. You paid for it with a card. And that you're exactly right. I mean, airlines, that's all they do now. But unless you can walk into a counter and say, I want to buy an airline ticket to so-and-so leaving in 30 minutes, that would be a problem with this. This bill would be a problem.
Representative Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that could happen. I mean, you could go to the airport without a ticket and they don't have the ability to do that. And that's the only thing that I'm concerned about is that when you're in a particular situation that I don't know if Bridgestone or our stadiums are set up, if they have concession stands or kiosks or whatnot, that they can change their entire model to accept cash because you're obviously at a concession stand in person, right? And so that's just my concern of what we're creating, not that cash is not legal tender. And I get the purpose and the intent of your piece of legislation. You should be able to pay with cash, but there are some circumstances where it could be a huge burden on our businesses. And I just want to make sure we're not making that burden a little bit worse.
Chairman House.
They also, of course, have the option to do what's in this bill, and that's put a kiosk there with one of these pieces of equipment where you can put $500 worth of cash in, and you'll get a card out. It's got $500 on it.
One last question, Mr.
Representative.
If you just ignore it, which I'm not suggesting anyone ignore state level, what's the penalty? What's that business subjected to if they don't comply?
It
Chairman
is,
Hosey.
I'm sorry, it is listed as a violation of this section constitutes an unfair or deceptive act prohibited under 47-18-104 and is punishable as provided in this part. Your guess is as good as mine.
You're making it a Consumer Protection Act
Okay,
violation.
okay, yeah.
That's what that does.
Yes. Okay. Any more?
No, that's all. That's all,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
yeah, Representative Lynn, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. What you were saying before about the credit card companies being willing to pay a business to not accept cash, shocking. It's as shocking to me as the fellow from the gun company who was saying that other businesses were colluding against them so that they couldn't deliver their goods, sell their goods, all of that. It's utterly shocking. And it seems quite discriminatory. You know, what if somebody is unbanked? What if they don't have a credit card? What if all they have is cash? And I mean, in some ways, it really seems discriminatory to some folks. And I think it's a very intriguing bill, and I think it's worth a try. I think it's definitely worth a try. I like that it's in the Consumer Protection Act, and maybe it will discourage any behavior such as trying to pay off retailers to simply use credit cards so that consumers can build up debt on credit cards and maybe not be able to pay their debt. So thank you.
Chairman Hosey.
Thank you. And thank you for the comment. There's about 26 other states who have run legislation or types of legislation like this. There are actually several cities in the United States, a lot of them Democrat cities, who have passed city ordinances saying that you cannot refuse cash over the issue that you just brought up. There's a lot of folks that pay all their bills with cash. They don't have a bank account. They don't have a credit card. And as the more businesses start refusing cash, the harder it is for them to do business. And I'm just trying to keep cash in circulation. Looking down the road at the Federal Reserve scaring me to death with the central bank digital currency, and we've talked about that. And it scares me.
Chairman Bricken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the sponsor. Certainly, I agree kind of morally, maybe ethically, that you're on the right track here. But in this day and time, I mean, most individuals, especially if you want to keep your transactions obscure or not be tracked, I mean, you can convert your cash to a prepaid card, Visa, MasterCard, and then use it. And you don't have to go to a kiosk. I mean, you can go to a bank and get it converted. And then you would have plastic cash in your wallet, I guess you call it, and operate. So, well, yeah, there's a fee for everything. But anyway, I just want to be sure that, I mean, there's ways for individuals to keep their privacy even in this plastic world we live in. So,
Chairman Halsey, did you want?
I was just going to say that between 2013 and 17, Yahoo, Marriott, Equifax, Heartland Payment Systems, LinkedIn, Sony, TJX, Anthem, JP Morgan, and Target databases of stored consumer personal information were all hacked and got all your data off of it.
Yeah. I got
You
some of mine
can't do
too.
that with cash.
All right. Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, you at the top, you threw out a lot of facts and figures and the $10,000 the representative mentioned. Do you have a source for that information?
Yes, thank you for asking.
Chairman
Well, hold on just a second. These stats came from the NCR Corporation, which I think is, well, you would know what that is, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. National Cash Register.
But are they part of the New York Stock Exchange or have something to do with it?
I think those make those cash registers. Yeah.
Well, I don't know who they are, but I'm using their numbers.
Okay. Even the piece where you talked about, Chairman, sorry. Yeah.
Leader Camper.
Even in the piece where you talked about people not being able to purchase a weapon because of their ideology or something like that, you mentioned, and people's political views and people being turned away because of their political ideology. That came out of the same report, or was that from some other source? I'm just curious about it.
Chairman Halsey.
That's what this
From the
article
same-
says is PayPal, Square, Stripe, and Apple Pay do not allow you to, or their services to be used to purchase firearms.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And, you know, I've been up here a long time, and I've often heard, even I believe you say, you know, just let the free market decide. We live in a free market society. You know, let the market decide what people want to do and how to function, how to move about, how to adjust. And it seems as if that philosophy works when we want it to work for our cause, our issue, or our point, until it's a situation where we want to do something different, then we don't want the free market to decide. And so I think this is a situation where the free market could in fact decide. And I think what the vice chairman mentioned earlier about, you know, if you want to not have your business disclosed or, you know, your transactions disclosed, you can put it on a temporary card and shred the card later and be done with it. You know, you can convert your cash to this plastic world we're living in. So it's just a little concerning to me, you know, but I understand where you're coming from, and cash, of course, is king, and I agree with that. But you know, I don't know if we need to be putting in statute some of these things that people can do and function now. You know, fine. You know, we're going to be disrupting businesses, I believe, with this legislation. You even admitted that that's possible, where we're going to put this extra burden on businesses to stand up some kiosk in all of its multiple locations, which is a cost that will be, you know, pushed on to the consumer. And so I'm just a little concerned about it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Halsey.
And I agree with you 100%. PayPal can do whatever they want. It's a private business. They can operate the way they want. The problem is if the gun store refuses cash, that's where the problem comes. You have no way to purchase. So.
All right, Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming back to me. And Chairman Holsby, I guess my more of a comment, and I invite you to respond, is that do you believe that this bill would encourage people to pay for cash for more things than they typically would? And let me kind of preface that. I don't use a debit card that a bank would issue me, right? I use a credit card to pay things. The reason is if there is some sort of fraud, something that happens, your money's taken and use that debit card, they're taking your money out of your bank account. Then you not only got to fight with Visa or whomever's holding that actual agreement for the credit card, you're also kind of fighting with the bank because they're going to hold up your money. In the credit card sense, you're not using your money. You're using somebody else's money to pay for things. And of course, you pay off credit card hopefully every month. But you're using somebody else's money, so you're not subject to the fraud that you could when you use a credit card. And so here, what I worry about is if someone's going to be, if we're encouraging people to pay for more things in cash, once that cash is gone, it's gone. If someone steals it, it's gone. If you lose it, you got a grandmama that wants to put their cash underneath their mattress. And believe me, I've had some estate plans, some probate matters where we thought the cash was buried in the backyard and we tried to go find it. We couldn't. And they swear they saw $10,000 buried in the backyard. That $10,000, poof, gone. Couldn't find it. So that's just my concern, that are we going to encourage, even though it's legal tender, and I get what you're trying to do, but I think the cost of using either a credit card, which I hope people do rather than using a debit card, even though there is a cost there, you get your money back in the sense if it's lost or there's fraudulent activity on your card. Here, that cash is gone. And someone driving around with a whole bunch of cash in their hand, paying all their bills that could be thousands and thousands of dollars, if we encourage this, concerns me that we could be subjecting to a lot of folks to losing that cash, and that cash is gone. So that's just one of my concerns. Also, that if we enact this piece of legislation, that we're going to have people losing their cash.
Chairman Halsey.
Well, of course, this bill doesn't say that you can't use credit. You know, anybody can use a credit card any place they want to, anytime they want to. This, of course, just says if cash is offered on in-person transaction at retail, you can't refuse it.
Okay, I'm sorry, Representative Sparks. Okay, you all want to flip a coin or?
Well, I was just going to make a small comment. Rather than, I don't really think of this bill as encouraging people to use cash. I really think of this bill as it is stopping coercion, stopping the coercing of people to use credit cards. If they choose not to, you know, my husband and I too, we put everything on a credit card and pay it off every month, and we like the Sky Miles, and that is why. No, but not everybody's that disciplined. And so some people try not to use a credit card, and there are some people who don't have one. Believe me, there are some people who don't have one because they can't get one. And so I just really think it's helping to stop the coercion of people to use credit cards. When I heard about that coercion of the $10,000, I mean, that's the point. That's the point of doing that. So thank you.
Chairman Halsey, any comment? Representative Sparks.
I hate to quote Bob Dylan, but he said the times they are changing, and the times they are changing. You know, Chairman, I don't know if I can hold these up, but I got Visa card, Heritage South, my little Venmo, my First Bank card, and then I got cash.
I don't think you can hold them up.
Okay,
It's
I'm
too
sorry.
late now.
But here's what this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. I don't think these cards say any of that stuff. I don't think they say any of that stuff. You know, this is, to me, it's fascinating. I know I'm not the only one. Bob Freeman's even fascinated by this discussion. I think the bill needs some work. It does. I'm going to support it just to get it to full committee to have more discussion. But this bill, those that are poor, folks of color, they're going to have, this is going to affect them the most if you can't use cash. Not everybody needs a mandate that you got to have a credit card and fees, you know, going to, I seen a video the other day, somebody showed me that you was going to, it was a grocery store and you had to have approval via a card. That's scary. That's not happened in America yet. I think it's Great Britain, but it's coming. This stuff's coming. So I appreciate your courage. And I know you care about the Constitution, you know, and you're getting to be a rare breed, brother. You really are. Well, I didn't say that. But anyways, I'm on sports legislation, but I think it does need some work. And those who have concerns, feel free to drop by.
I'll give you
my
some
office.
cash if you vote for it.
No,
We can't do that either. Okay. We've already broke about 3 laws in here today. Chairman Jose, the one concern, and I didn't think about it until Representative Garrett brought it up too, but I remember like the 9/11, what happened then. They walked into an airport and bought their tickets with cash. And so they didn't want to be tracked. That was something that happened. And I think they passed a federal law or something to that effect right after that they couldn't buy an airline ticket with cash. Is that
Maybe so.
correct?
I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Yeah. I just happened to remember that a while ago. If we got one more question, Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hosey, I think I heard you say what you're actually just trying to do with this legislation is say that a business cannot refuse cash in these retail transactions. And that also included the airport or other places, like if the representative who has that $100 up there goes somewhere and he, sees something he likes, he wants to buy it, and they're saying, we don't accept cash here. We've been, robbed too many times. We went to this, system of just electronic transfer. They would have to comply with this as long as it's more than 6 or above.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Chairman Halsey.
That is
comment?
correct.
Yeah.
If you have more than 6 employees on an in-person retail transaction, yeah, if somebody presents cash, you have to take it, except for these exceptions that are carved out.
Yeah, and I don't think he had $100. He had a $1 bill he was reading that off of. It wasn't 100. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for the sponsor? If not, I think, do we have a question on the bill? We've got a question on the bill. So all in favor of House Bill, sorry, I went to the wrong page. All in favor of House Bill 2798, please say aye. All opposed? No. Okay, pretty close. I think we'll have to have a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Representative Barrett? Aye. Barrett votes aye. Representative Bricken? No. Bricken votes no. Representative Camper? No. Camper votes no. Representative Faison? Representative Garrett? No. Garrett votes no. Representative Lynn? Aye. Lynn votes aye. Representative Sparks? Representative Sparks votes aye. Representative Vaughn? Chairman Powers?
No.
You have 3 ayes, 4 noes.
I'm sorry, the bill failed. Thank you, Chairman Halsey, for your work.
Thank you, Chairman of the Committee.
Okay, next bill is House Bill 2762 by Chairman Grills. Got a motion and a second. Chairman Grills, you may proceed with your explanation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I've enjoyed watching the committee this afternoon. In 2022, the financial institutions introduced a unique merchant category codes specifically for transactions at firearm stores. These newly established merchant codes have raised concerns as financial institutions have publicly declared that they enable the identification of purchases as potentially high-risk transactions, granting them the authority to file suspicious activity reports with the Treasury Department, Financial Crimes Network. It is important to note that this unique merchant code is applied to any purchase at a firearm store, regardless of whether the transaction involves a firearm or not. Adoption of these MCCs will subject law-abiding citizens who purchase an item at a firearm store to search warrants and questioning based on ill-found and baseless suspicious activity reports. Therefore, this legislation is introduced to limit the capacity of financial institutions to engage in unauthorized surveillance of consumers engaging in lawful transactions at firearm stores. This legislation bans financial institutions from requiring or discriminating against firearm stores that do not participate in the usage of unique merchant codes that are different from general purchase merchant codes or sporting goods merchant codes. And the violation of this act will constitute an investigation by the AG, a civil penalty of up to $10,000 per violation committed. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we have a couple of people here from the NRA and the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And I would like to have them, if it'd be okay with the committee, to go out of session and have them make a few comments.
Yes, we have them on the list to testify. The first one up is Christopher Lee.
Can they
with
come up
the
together, Mr. Chairman?
NSSF, and we're going to go out of motion and have Mr. Lee come back up again.
Mr. Chairman, can they come up together?
They can. And they have 5 minutes between the two of them.
However you-
Okay.
Thank
You
you.
can split up either way you want to do it.
Thank you. That'll keep you all from having to hear the same story twice. So we appreciate it. Again, my name is Chris Lee. I'm with the NSSF, the Firearm Industry Trade Association. For the members that weren't here, representing 10,500 firearm industry companies and businesses across the country. So I want to take you back and just provide some background on how we got where we are today. And it all really started back in 2018 with a New York Times article that was literally called "How Banks Could Control Gun Sales If Washington Won't." And that article proposed a lot of things, but one thing it proposed was that credit card companies could be used to keep a list and track who goes to gun shops. A lot of people don't know, I didn't know until I started working for the firearm industry, that the federal government is legally prohibited from maintaining a list of firearm purchasers. That's why gun shops have to maintain their records for such a long period of time for tracing and so on. So they wanted a way around that. They said, let's use credit card companies. So they worked. When I say they, there was a group of individuals behind this, and from the U.S. Senate, it was Elizabeth Warren. There were a couple elected officials from New York as well, and there were the three big gun control groups and one bank, one singular bank that I'm told is just an activist bank out in, I believe they're in the Northeast. And that one bank, because they're technically a bank, they have petitioning power in this Switzerland-based organization that sets credit card codes. So they petitioned this organization, which is the International Organization for Standardization, or the ISO. They petitioned them from 2018, after this article came out, until 2022. And what they wanted, again, was just a code that would tell the credit card companies that a person is making a purchase at a firearm retail shop. And they wanted this because firearm retail purchases are traditionally labeled general merchandise or sporting goods. And that's just not clear enough for them. They wanted to know who's going to gun shops. So we started to work in 2022 when we heard that this code was going to be applied to our gun shops across the country. We started to work with the large payment card networks to find a way to ban these codes. And they said, yes, these codes can be banned at the state level. And we worked on language. And from March of 2023, when that language was finalized, to today, 7 states have banned a merchant category code specific to firearm retailers in their states. And the bill has been introduced in an additional 18 states in the last 2 months. And just in the last 2 weeks, the bill has passed out of a chamber in Georgia, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Utah, and maybe a couple other states. So the bill is moving quickly because it's a real concern that people are going to be tracked and profiled when they go to gun shops. And this would make it easy to do. So I appreciate your time, and I believe Kelby from the NRA will address our concerns with this.
Okay. And you have time
Yes,
for
sir.
comments, please.
My name's Kelby Senior. I'm the NRA State Director for Tennessee. Appreciate the committee and Chairman Powers for allowing me to speak. So on the specific concerns with gun owners on this, there's 3 main ones. A gun registration. So this using an MCC code to track firearm purchases with ammunition and firearms. The problem with that is collecting firearm retailer financial transaction data that amounts to surveillance and registration of law-abiding gun owners. And so what this is doing, it's circumventing the legislative process and using the private sector to create a potential gun registry. And we certainly have concerns, and our members do, and gun owners, that we would never want this applied. We've seen states like California that are mandating it currently. Colorado is also actively pushing forward on mandating the code as well. So the purpose of this is to protect those law-abiding gun owners so that a gun registry is not created. On top of that, Chris already mentioned that federal law contains multiple restrictions on the creation of a national firearms registry. So we don't want to see this happen at the state level. We also see the political abuse that can come from this. So the scheme, the MCC scheme could offer, it would restrict and surveil those who exercise their First Amendment rights in a manner that gun control advocates or the federal government disapprove of. And then lastly, this could be a target for crime. So when governments and private companies, they're always under a constant threat of having their data stolen or inadvertently leaked. Not collecting certain sensitive data is the most effective means of ensuring it does not fall into the wrong hands. So if collected firearm retailer MCC data were made public, gun owners could be targeted for thieves and by thieves and other criminals. So we've seen this across the country and across the globe, actually. Sensitive gun owner data has been leaked, with New Zealand gun owners suffering a security breach in 2019. And then most recently, the names, home addresses, and the dates of birth of California carry permit holders were exposed by the California Department of Justice. So those are just three major reasons as to the concerns of law-abiding gun owners and why we would like to see this MCC code prohibited in the state of Tennessee. So with that, we certainly urge you to support this legislation.
Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony. And do we have any questions from the committee? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, I'm sorry, I did not get your last name.
It's Lee,
Lee, thank you.
L-E-E.
Thank you, Chris Lee. I appreciate it, Mr. Lee. You mentioned some people that was the they, because in my mind I heard that they, and I was wondering who the they were, and you mentioned them out. But one of them was a Swiss bank, you said, correct?
It's a U.S. bank that petitioned the Switzerland-based organization that approves these types of codes. The International Organization for Standardization is based in Switzerland. So it was a U.S. bank, an activist bank, I'm told by other banks. So US
Activism
bank,
is good.
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay. So it was a U.S. bank, not a Swiss bank. I was curious what was the interest of the Swiss bank in U.S. policy. So anyway, that kind of was a red flag for me there. And you also, do you have some idea about why you think these registry may be being created, other than some people just want it? Are they doing something nefarious with the information? What are you seeing, hearing out there with respect to the list that's already been, I guess, compiled? You're saying some states have already compiled a list.
California mandated the code in the state, but that hasn't gone into effect yet.
Oh, I
so
understand.
right now there isn't a list out there in California, but there will be when the law goes into effect. I don't know if Kelby knows the date.
I don't cover California, but since they've mandated it and other states like Colorado are also pushing for the mandation of the code, that's why we have concerns and we're trying to prohibit the code in Tennessee and other states as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony.
Any other questions for the witnesses? I have one, if you don't care. On this code that you're talking about, how do they distinguish, or how would they prevent that from being? Would they just have to put it under an alternative code, or just put it under a general sporting code? Or
we would just ask that it stays the way it is now, where gun shops can choose sporting goods wholesale or sporting good retailers or general merchandise. And there's a couple other codes that firearm retailers typically are offered, and they're offered by their merchant acquiring bank or credit union, or in certain cases, the actual credit card payment card processor tells them which codes they can accept. And we just don't think that firearm retail code should be forced upon these shops. So that's how it would be banned, is it just wouldn't be offered and things would stay the way they are now. So we're actually saying do less work, don't create a whole new system to track law-abiding gun owners.
Okay. And Leader Camper.
Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you probably answered the question I was going to ask you. How are we doing it now? And you mentioned that the retailer gets to decide, we've given them the freedom to decide how they're going to record this sale. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, they take they don't decide like per sale. They just go based on their operation as a whole. And yes, they get to choose unless there's a clear code that they would fall under. So if a firearm retail code was required and they sold over 50% of their businesses guns and ammo, then the presumption is that they would be forced to take the firearm retail code if these codes were permitted to go forward.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And have you all been, and this may be a question for the sponsor, have there been conversation with the financial institutions about this, the bank that we were citing earlier? Or have there been any kind of communication with them about this?
So we've been working on this in a lot of states, and we have had a lot of conversations with financial institutions. And I know we've had conversations here in Tennessee as well. And I'm not going to speak to their position on the bill,
That's right,
obviously,
yeah.
but we've had conversations, and there's actually a bill that was introduced a week and a half ago in Congress that does the same thing. It was introduced by Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, in the U.S. House, and I know that bill was the product of about 5 or 6 months of discussions and negotiations between all the financial entities that are active at the federal level. So yes, there's been a lot of good conversation on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other questions for our guests? If not, thank you both for coming out today.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here and following up. And we're going to go back into session. And Chairman Grills, are you ready for any other comments or questions?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that. And I also want to recognize the fact that in September of 2022, it was the 20th or 22nd, Jonathan Scarmetti, our Attorney General, in conjunction with 16 or 17 other states, sent a letter to the ISO, that bank that they referenced, with concerns about this and the constitutionality of it. And then Leader Camper brought up the fact about the bankers and some of the different things that they had brought up. And that is a concern because we don't want to do anything that would harm them. We want to work with them as best as possible. The latter part of this bill, there's a private right of action, and they have some heartburn about that. So we're trying to work with them to come to a solution that we can all get on the same page. And after talking to Chairman Powers earlier today, I would request that we could roll this 1 week to make sure we get those little issues worked out with them.
Okay.
So if that'd be amenable,
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Okay. With that objection, we're going to roll 1 week. I spell 2762 is roll 1 week.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
thank
Chairman.
you, and thank you for your cooperation.
Can I take up 12 more minutes?
Yes, you can have all his time. Okay, the next bill on the calendar is House Bill 1832 by Representative Freeman. Got a motion and a second. Representative Freeman.
Thank you,
may
Chairman and Committee. I've
proceed.
got amendment drafting code 14108.
That is correct. Sorry. Yes. Motion and a second on the amendment. All in favor, say of aye. All opposed, the amendment is adopted. Representative Freeman, you're welcome to proceed with the bill.
Thank you, Chairman Committee. I too have enjoyed listening this for the past 2 weeks, so it's been great. So
We
this
can
is
make it drag on longer.
Thank you, sir. This is a consumer protection bill. I received phone calls, as I'm sure you do as well, from many of your constituents, predominantly seniors, that sign up for an introductory rate for a program online, and it continues to renew ad nauseum, and they can't figure out how to get out of there. And what this does is it requires any service that auto renews to reach back out and remind them that it's about to auto renew and give them the option to opt out. And if they don't get that option, they have the right to get their money back.
Okay. Any questions for the sponsor? Representative Lynn.
Thank you. I notice you have a guest with you. Is that young man your guest?
Oh, yes. Would you like me to introduce
Oh, yeah.
Dante?
Of course.
Yeah, my intern, Dante Buttry.
Oh,
Oh,
welcome.
very good. Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for that.
And
embarrassing.
then I do have a question. So what if the business isn't currently collecting phone numbers so that they can reach out, in text, or is it email, or maybe they're not collecting email addresses? Is there sort of a honeymoon period where that can take place?
That's a
Representative
good
Freeman.
question. I would assume anybody that is paying for someone's service would have some sort of contact information. But I mean, there's nothing in here that speaks to that.
Representative Lynn.
Can you give me an example of a service that you would pay for that they wouldn't know who you are?
I could probably think of some, and I'm just wondering if there's a lengthy enactment. What would be the enactment date on this?
July of this year.
July of this year.
Mhm.
That might give businesses enough time to start collecting that information. Is there any sort of grandfather period for businesses who maybe are doing the automatic renewal? No one has complained. They've been fine with it. And so does it apply to new purchases going forward, or all purchases that are currently in place?
It's all purchases.
All purchases
Yeah,
currently in place?
Correct.
Would you be willing to have an amendment that it would apply to, a date certain? So new purchases going forward, that's the way it will.
Well, that's effectively what it
Representative Lynn?
does. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Chairman.
Representative
That's
Freeman.
effectively what it does, with an enactment date pushed out, 5 months from now. It gives businesses an opportunity to do this. Listen, most businesses that are reputable are doing this right now. The predominant group that I'm going after, the predatory introductory offer, where they'll email you, a senior goes, that's a great idea. They click on it. They pay you $5 for the first year. It auto renews at $500, and they don't have the ability to do it. I would be shocked if somebody is auto renewing somebody and they have no way to contact them. They've got to have, if you're paying for a service, they've got to have an email address that you're giving the service to, or a phone number that you've signed up for. Talk to several stakeholders and industry groups, and they've all been on board with it. I'm even made some changes to get rid of some of the harsher language in the bill. I wanted it to be an affirmative consent, where you have to reach back out and ask them again if you would like to continue the service. Many stakeholders felt that might be too onerous on them. And so this is simply, hey, we're going to bill you again, and you have the ability to opt out. And I really think that specifically in our two districts, I think it will help a lot of the seniors that are paying for these services that they don't even know. My grandmother just recently passed away, and when we shut down her accounts, she was signed up for all sorts of services that I know she didn't know she was getting. And this just forces these groups to reach back out and say, hey, are you sure you want to continue doing this? So
two more questions.
Representative Lynn?
Is this only applicable to, you're saying, sort of online subscriptions that you apply or have?
It's any service that auto renews.
Representative Freeman.
And then one
Representative
more. So are you saying that all services that are currently in place and people have been renewing and there's been no issue at all, it applies to them too?
Representative Freeman.
Every service that auto renews.
And they have
Representative
to,
Lynn.
and every single time they have to email them and say, we're going to renew.
Representative Freeman.
Yes, just like when you get your insurance, or if you have a service that auto renews annually, and it says, hey, reminder, March 1st, we're gonna auto renew.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, thank you. And and thank you for the bill. The one, I kind of like the bill, to be honest with you, the way you had it before you did amend it, but I understand why you did that.
We'll bring it back.
Okay. We have somebody else, Representative Sparks.
Real quick, I recently signed up for a radio. I'm not going to say the name of the company, starts with an S. and the subscription. And when I was researching them, one of the biggest complaints was trying to cancel the service. It was terrible. I'm going to support the legislation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for that support.
Yes, I have a lot of those that I don't even know about. Chairman Bricken.
Would this bill put some restrictions on automatic car wash renewal companies?
Representative Freeman.
I'll withdraw my question.
I mean, we can opt them out if it's a conflict for people on the committee.
Okay, and Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for the bill, because I've had to do that for my mother who's gotten up in age and forgot about, automatic deductions. And I had to go through a lengthy process to get onto the account to be able to cancel the stuff. So I agree with you about it's just a yearly reminder that, hey, it's going to automatically renew. Secondly, I subscribe to a company, not the one he spoke of, and I was trying to go to figure out how to unsubscribe, and it was just ridiculous. And every month I'm saying, I don't want to pay for this anymore. But it was difficult. So it is a problem with some companies, and I understand what you're trying to get at. And so I'll be supporting the bill because I've had personal experience with this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sponsor.
Okay, I'm gonna go out of session just for a moment. I want to clear up something we talked about a minute ago about the contact information. We got some information from legal about what contact, and then we'll go back to. Yes, I'm gonna go out of session for a moment.
Levin Middleton, Office of Legal Services. So under the current statute, which is 47-18-133, under subsection B, it says that a business that makes this kind of automatic renewal offer has to provide a telephone number or an email or just a physical address that someone can mail or just reach out to if they would like to cancel these services as well. So they should have a means to contact the business itself too.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a question for legal?
Thank you. But in this instance, I think we're talking about the opposite, where the business has to have an organized means to contact the consumer. And that might not always occur. Like some consumers might not give a true phone number, a true email. There's no chance to verify that. Or maybe it was recorded improperly or something like that. So that's why I was wondering.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for legal? Okay, we're going to go back into session.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to address that, I mean, if someone gives a fake number, it would just renew. They would just renew again. And I mean, if someone gave a wrong number or moved, it would continue to renew. I'm happy to work with you to solve that problem as well. But this is for people that sign up for renewing programs in a predatory manner, and they give a low introductory rate, continue to renew. They just gives them the opportunity to get out of these things. So,
okay,
thank you for your questions.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, as I understand the bill, this is only requiring the company that has the renewal to reach out to the customer to notify them that the renewal is coming. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You've heard a couple of questions here that brought up a serious issue about the ability to actually cancel. Would you consider amending this bill and adding to it a provision that not only do they have to notify in the notice that they're going to auto renew, that there be included a link or some means of process for how to cancel that subscription?
Representative Freeman.
Can we put it on in the full?
Yeah, I don't have, yeah, Representative Barrett.
Yes,
I'd be
I'm not
happy to do
asking you to do that before it leaves subcommittee. I'm just saying, I think that this bill can be even better, and you've got a good bill, but I think that's something that we can take it a step further and actually really provide some guidance for the consumer as to how to get out of these things.
Yeah, I welcome the opportunity to work with you on that. Thank you for
Okay.
the idea.
Any other questions? Question on the bill? Okay, all in favor of House Bill 1832, sorry, say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 1832 moves out to full commerce. Thank you, Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Chairman Committee.
And we are out of time. And okay, yes, and we're going to roll all the rest of the bills to the top of the next calendar. Thank you all for coming out today. We're adjourned. We're adjourned.